Welcome to Bloomberg UK Politics, your bite-sized guide to the corridors of power. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm James Woolcock. Now, Stephen, I don't think I'll be telling you anything you haven't heard before if a lot of people on social media have been comparing this campaign to 1997. Now,
is there anyone on social media old enough to remember 1997?
Just because me and our producer may or may not have been born then, that is a separate debate.
Separate bitterness, yeah.
Well, I mean, there is this debate to be had about the similarities, but then one thing that has changed is, like you say, social media, the fact we're even having that debate on Twitter.
There were barely websites in 1997. I looked at the BBC News website when it launched in December 1997.
Really?
Yeah,
and now it's everywhere. Now you cannot consume news in the UK at least, without being on the BBC News website. Have you been looking at the TikTok channels as well?
Now, I have to admit, I'm not on TikTok, but I do see them when they're reposted on other social media platforms. These things have been seeping through, but we're looking particularly today at how the political parties have been approaching this social media platform in this election.
Well, look, here's the memeified version of how Labour imagined Conservative candidates trying to distance themselves from the government and what they would say about the Prime Minister.
I don't know who this man is. I mean, he could be walking down the street. I wouldn't know a thing. Sorry to this man.
That's a video from the UK's Labour TikTok account. They're using the popular sound featuring the voice of actress Keke Palmer. Now, look, when the election was announced a week ago, I didn't expect that Cilla Black and National Service would be the words I would put in the same sentence. But that's also another viral video on the Labour's TikTok. That one viewed 4.2 million times as it stands. But, as I frequently remind people when it comes to polls on Twitter, which is my area of expertise, just because that's the narrative and a lot of people have seen it does not mean it is going to translate into votes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, views on social media don't necessarily mean votes and certainly don't necessarily mean a parliamentary majority. And there's an age question here as well about how exactly who's seeing these messages on social media and whether they are the target audience for these political parties. The Conservatives are on TikTok as well. Both parties joined the platform in the wake of the general election announcement. We'll get into that in a moment as well. The videos are quite different, though. Let's listen to one of the videos from the Conservative Party TikTok account.
What I am doing is proposing a bold new model of national service for 18-year-olds. They'll be able to choose to spend 12 months in a full-time military commission or one weekend per month volunteering in roles within your local community.
So that's Rishi Sunak on his party's TikTok channel talking about the national service policy from the Tory party. So sounds a little bit more like perhaps a traditional political party broadcast. The approach is being taken by the parties quite different.
I mean, it puts me in mind of the recent David Cameron sort of walk and talks. It's very kind of professional politician. You could have seen that happen in sort of mid-2010s. I remember campaigns back then. Very, very different to the kind of meme-centric debate that Labour are having, which I think plays a lot more into how TikTok and modern social media seems to be working.
Well, let's dig into some of the details of that. We've brought in a social media and digital communications expert to help us dig into these questions. Tim Gatz worked as head of digital engagement and creative content at the Department of Education, amongst other similar roles in government departments. He is a digital communications consultant, co-hosts a podcast called Sorry You Went Viral, and he's been busy analysing the party's TikTok efforts in recent days. Tim, great to have you with us on the show. TikTok itself, not a platform without controversy. We did note that the political parties have only just joined. What do they stand to gain from being on TikTok in this election campaign?
Yeah, as you said, what I found fascinating about parties across the world, particularly in the Western world, due to concerns around security, around China now, I've heard recently about Kieran Martin, who used to head up a security or tech expert at GCHQ and then the National Cyber Security Centre. He said this is much more of a geopolitical issue than necessarily an issue around data and security of that data and privacy of the data. And I think it's really, in short, if you can't beat them, join them. We've seen in the US, Joe Biden, who obviously recently has signed an act to ban TikTok if its owners don't sell it, joining TikTok. And to some extent has some success initially. I think about 10 million views for his first Super Bowl Q&A, has decreased a little bit, and they've been trying out different formats. And likewise, the Republicans with Trump and his campaign team joining as well. And I think for for the UK, it's been very hard to ignore. I think, as I understand, there's been lots of conversations behind the scenes about whether to join or not. We saw the UK government joining successfully at the start of the Ukraine war, and then since Liz Truss came in as PM, it's been on pause. And I just think it's very hard for them to ignore what is becoming relatively important communications tool and a very popular app. In a short space of time, there are some recent Ofcom figures coming out, and it's on neck and neck, really, with Twitter now in terms of most used app amongst adults, social app amongst adults. And I expect that to overtake it very shortly. And as you said, there's a increasingly use of what was originally a younger audience, but like any app, as we've seen all the way back from Facebook, when it becomes starts getting popular, the demographics get older as more and more people use them. And it isn't so much now a young person's app. We've seen older people using it. We've seen much more, as you said, traditional kind of TV, clips of TV being used. You don't necessarily need to be a slick, highly produced video or dancing to some latest trend. But I think for them, the parties have really weighed up the pros and cons, the benefits and the risks, and thought as a way of trying to experiment with reaching audiences, different audiences between Labour and Tories quite clearly, and as a way of as a multi-platform approach to this campaign.
I want to pick up on that multi-platform approach, because something that is an obvious fundamental of social media that we don't really, I think, take seriously enough is we all think we're experiencing the same election campaign. Yeah, on social media, we're all getting our own individual serving of that campaign, which is why it's so fascinating to talk to you, Tim, because you've been looking at kind of the data of how parties are targeting various people. What can we say about the kind of demographics and messaging that parties are trying to get out in a way that I wouldn't see on my feed compared to, say, Stephen's social media feed?
Yeah, indeed. I think to say social media has changed quite dramatically in the last 5 years or so, and it keeps on changing, which I find personally fascinating, although hard to keep up. Um, from going, say, from previous elections where it's much more based around who you follow, or targeted ads, for example, if you want to pay to really reach people. The rise of TikTok has seen a surge in apps from TikTok to Instagram to Twitter to Facebook, all using algorithmic based feeds in order to show what they think you would be interested in. And we've seen this shift a lot more now from who you follow to basically what you like to engage with, what interests you, what generates any kind of emotion, anger or sadness or fury or laughter. And so I think what you're seeing at the moment on TikTok, particularly between the two parties, is a testing of the waters. What social media is great at, unlike, say, paying for a TV ad, is that the ability to try things and see how they work. Now, you mentioned the data, James. The tricky thing with TikTok is obviously we can't see publicly what they're targeting or who they're trying to get to. It's unlike, say, Meta, who own Facebook and Instagram. They have a public library which basically shows you, anyone can see who an organization, a party, an individual, who are they targeting with a paid ad in terms of their age, location, interests, for example. Now, with TikTok, what's happened over here in the UK is that TikTok have said no political party can pay to boost a political advert, which is interesting compared to Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So we don't know exactly who they're targeting, but just take a look. And you mentioned at the start about the different approaches. Now, you played the clip from Labour. They're playing very much into what I'd call kind of the memification, the banter around social media. Now, I would class myself as a very online, very engaged person, and I see a lot of these jokes. You may remember the Cilla Black clips being played over the last few months, particularly on Twitter and TikTok.
Unfortunately,
Now,
Tim, I remember it from the first time around it was on television. So it's been more disturbing to see it was resurfacing in this manner.
you're showing our age again, Stephen. But yeah, indeed, the idea to lots of people that just doesn't make any sense at all to people who aren't as wired online. And as we've seen previously, all the way back to say the 2015 election, where arguably you could say that Labour won Twitter with its banter and its viral posts. But unfortunately, that didn't convert into winning an election. And I think what you're seeing now from both sides, both teams, who have got some incredibly clever, very talented people, far more talented than me. They basically know what they're doing here. They're trying to play a game here, trying to target different audiences. And for Labour at the moment, both parties are quite late to the game on TikTok, only just establishing in just before the local elections. They're basically seeing about appealing to different audiences. Labour have been very successful with those memes, particularly given that slight gift of the national service announcement and how it was handled. That really plays into that younger audience and successfully engaging them and generating lots of comments and positive comments around it. The Tories taking a different approach. Initially, as you said, a bit more of a traditional TV feel, piece to camera, as they call it in the industry, feel to that initial clip. Although it had a few production TikTok-y techniques, but very much more speaking straightforwardly, plainly. And you've seen since the Conservatives' other videos experimenting slightly in different techniques, but still quite straight, no real gimmicks as such. I think this goes back to the ultimate aim of the campaign. The Tories, I'm no political campaign expert, but having seen from what they've done, feels that it's much more about reiterating this message of Rishi Sunak is a man with a plan. He's gone of the gimmicks that we may have seen from previous times as Chancellor. It's very much in difficult times, this is what I'm doing, and it's played straightforward, which is playing to a different audience, I would say. Now, again, it gets caught up. A lot of people on TikTok are seeing this video, and with the theme of it being national service and attracting that 18-year-olds or younger, is attracting a lot of criticism.
Okay.
But what is interesting, particularly now in an algorithmic-driven era, is the worst thing for any content is to not get any reaction at all, is to be ignored. Because if you don't care, if you swipe on, the algorithm thinks, okay, you're not interested. But even if you love it, brilliant. If you hate it and you criticize it, you share it to your mates on WhatsApp, going, "What on earth is this?" That is seen by the algorithm as generating a reaction and a response. So they'll show it to more people. So
Okay.
in a way, they're playing a clever game.
Tim, what about the other parties in all of this as well? I noticed that the Reform UK party has quite a large number of followers compared to the other UK political parties. And I wonder, does that go back to the point you were making earlier about perhaps provoking a reaction is what's helping some of these parties gain traction in their online campaigns?
Yeah, as you said, Reform UK, they've been going on slightly longer on TikTok than the others, and they've really kind of stolen a march. As we mentioned before, an increasingly older audience who tend to be the voters for Reform have been joining TikTok and then following Reform. Now, as we mentioned earlier, followers don't necessarily equate to great success on TikTok, and Reform have not had a big breakout viral moment. But what they have had is a steady drumbeat of content, similar to the Conservatives in terms of it's much more traditional feeling of a politician talking to a camera or a clip from GB News or Talk TV, for example, just very crudely cut and posted on TikTok. But then what is interesting about TikTok, you don't have to highly produce something if the caption and the messaging and it's clear to the user what it's about, and as you said, generating a potential reaction in favor of what they're talking about, that could be equally as effective as a highly produced piece. So yes, Reform are taking a much more traditional approach to it, and that seems to be working for them. The Lib Dems have recently joined TikTok, and they're taking more of a Labour approach, which is a mixture of stronger messaging mixed in with a bit of memes and banter that kind of tend to play to their audience. And the Green Party, I see, are also on there, again, been on there a bit of a long time, building up a steady stream of support and converting people around some of those key issues around the environment, particularly rivers, for example. And say, for example, if you are engaging with content around, say, sewage in your local river, you may be served, more likely to be served, the Green Party content if they're posting about a similar issue to that.
This speaks to kind of, I think, the broader picture here that is social media makes all of our engagement with politics so much more complex. I mean, Tim, you just spoke to the different parties and their strategies, but I guess you've also got varying ways of engagement on different social medias with varying audiences and differing levels of trust in politics. So with that kind of aim that you set out earlier of, if you were this political campaign chief and you had a magic wand, you could get control of any medium for a day, be it TikTok, YouTube, even say BBC push alerts or the BBC website, which one would you pick and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I should say the situation we're in now is different to 2019. As I mentioned before, the media environment we're in now is complex, fragmented, really competitive, and always changing, which makes it very hard for all kind of campaigners and communicators to gain traction. In terms of which one I would choose most, it's interesting. I was reading a piece from The Guardian about BBC push alerts, and that idea that it's directly in your phone an alert, sometimes with a sound. I mean, they drive me mad. But for certain people, large group of people, millions of people, they have those switched on. So the power to dramatically reach someone directly on their phone is really, really powerful. And the problem with social media is it is all algorithmic based. You've got to kind of be on there to see it. And I think some of the more traditional methods, TV is still incredibly important and powerful, and we'll see that over the election. So I would say there isn't one kind of one direct solution. There's anything that you can get directly still into people's phones, into their homes, is still very powerful. So, the leafleting, that is still a key part, and door knocking is still a key part of campaigning. It isn't being trashed and everyone just sending messages on Facebook, for example. But anything that can be directly into people, that bypassing social media or the media, could be really helpful. And I think what I'm really interested in at the moment, which I mentioned in my piece I wrote, was about the use of WhatsApp and the potential for it. Both all the main parties are now on WhatsApp channels, which you may or may not have seen, which is basically a separate part of WhatsApp, still on the same app, but a different kind of tab, where they send updates. And it's been very interesting to see how the parties have used them in their different ways. But that idea that you can create a piece of content or a post, and as a receiver, you feel so moved by it because you believe in it or you find it funny that you'll share it to your family and friends or into your mates group chat, and then gets into that WhatsApp ecosystem. I'm sure you've seen WhatsApps being forwarded on that you've got from friends or in group chats. And what they want to do, parties ideally want to capitalize upon that and get into the ecosystem. It's hard work. WhatsApp channels has been a really hit and miss for a lot of organizations so far. It may be too early for this campaign, but I do think that's a really interesting thing to see. But I would say, yeah, as you mentioned, the BBC News alerts, Sky News alerts, or any news organization, they still are powerful. So you still kind of need, in a way, that media support in order to get into people's directly in front of people.
Okay. Tim Gatt of the Tiga Consultancy, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insights on the programme today. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe, give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Guastamakia. I'm James Woolcock.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.